On June 24, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold looked past Mount Rainier and saw 9 strange objects moving across the sky in a way he could not explain. He timed them, studied them, and reported them exactly as a pilot would. Within days, the press seized on the story, military intelligence took notice, and publisher Raymond A. began drawing Arnold into a deeper mystery. What started as one man's daylight sighting would help ignite the modern flying saucer era. Kenneth Arnold was not a man looking for attention. He was a working businessman, an experienced pilot, and a disciplined observer. Born in Minnesota in 1915 and raised in Montana and North Dakota, he had been an Eagle Scout, a serious athlete, and later a fire control engineer covering a wide western territory. Flying was central to his work. By 1947, he had logged long hours in his own airplane and had made hundreds of rough landings in cow pastures and mountain meadows. He believed he knew the sky well enough to trust what he was seeing. Part of what made Kenneth Arnold so compelling to investigators and editors alike was how grounded his life seemed against the strangeness of the claim. This was not a drifter spinning a wild story for attention. He had built a business across 5 western states, flown between 40 and 100 hours a month, and landed in hundreds of rough cow pastures. By his own account, in all that time, a flat tire had been his worst mishap. He knew terrain, weather, altitude, and distance in a practical, hard-earned way. That contrast mattered. The military interviewer would later emphasize that Arnold was a family man, a provider, and a pilot whose estimates of speed, location, and flight path could not be dismissed lightly. After checking aeronautical maps, the officer concluded that Arnold's measurements could very possibly be factual, and Palmer, for all his fascination with the mystery, first recognized something equally important: that Arnold was a credible witness. He wanted Arnold's account in Arnold's own words, with photographs, sketches, and a signed written record, before rumor, ridicule, and official hesitation could distort what had really happened in the sky over Mount Rainier. On June 24, 1947, Arnold had finished work in Chehalis, Washington, and took off for Yakima at about 2 in the afternoon. Before continuing on course, he spent time helping search for a missing marine transport reported down near Mount Rainier. He flew near the high ridges around Rainier and Ashford, but found no sign of the lost aircraft. After turning back above Mineral and climbing again to roughly 9,200 feet, he settled into smooth, clear afternoon air and simply watched the sky and terrain. Then a bright flash reflected onto his airplane. At first, Arnold thought he was too close to another aircraft. Looking to the left and north of Mount Rainier, he saw a chain of 9 peculiar objects moving rapidly through the sky. They were flying roughly north to south, near his own altitude, and every few seconds, 1 or 2 of them would dip or shift, just enough for the sun to flash brightly from their surfaces. At first, he assumed they were some kind of jet planes, but something was wrong. He could not make out any tails. As the objects approached the snowy background of Mount Rainier, Arnold could see their outlines more clearly. They moved in a diagonal chain, like geese linked together, swerving through the mountain peaks while still holding a definite course. Using Mount Rainier and Mount Adams as fixed reference points, Arnold began timing them. He watched the first object pass the southern edge of Rainier, then later saw the formation reach Adams in 1 minute and 42 seconds. Comparing the objects against a distant DC-4 and against a small tool in his pocket, he concluded they were very large, though still hard to judge. When they moved straight and level, they appeared like thin, dark lines. When they flipped in the sunlight, they flashed bright and seemed almost round. They held a nearly constant elevation and did not behave like rockets or artillery. The more Arnold watched, the more disturbed he became. He turned his plane for an unobstructed look and insisted later that what he saw was not reflection, mirage, or imagination. His total observation lasted roughly 2.5 to 3 minutes. By the time the objects passed beyond Mount Adams, they were too far away for him to determine shape clearly, but not before he had convinced himself that he had seen something real and extraordinary. He continued searching for the missing plane for a short time, but the sighting would not leave his mind. When Arnold landed at Yakima, he described what he had seen to friends, including Al Baxter, who listened politely but did not really believe him. Later, at Pendleton, other pilots took the account more seriously and suggested guided missiles or some secret new craft. Former Army pilots told Arnold they had been briefed during the war that they might encounter unusual aerial objects of similar shape. Arnold himself refused to make wild guesses. He said only that he had observed something real and that it remained as much a mystery to him as to anyone else. 2 days later, on June 26, 1947, Raymond A. Palmer of Venture Press wrote to Arnold after reading the Chicago Tribune account of the sighting. Palmer said Arnold's report was important because he already possessed other confirmations of similar objects, though none as detailed. He invited Arnold to write a personal article for his magazine under his own byline, and asked for photographs, sketches, and a short biographical statement. He offered payment for the article, the pictures, and any usable drawings. Even if Arnold chose not to write the full piece, Palmer still wanted written confirmation that the newspaper story was true. By mid-July, Arnold's story had also reached military investigators. In an internal memo, the interviewer described Arnold as a 32-year-old husband, father, businessman, and apparently solid citizen. The officer wrote that Arnold seemed sincere, that his character made fabrication unlikely, and that if he had invented such a detailed account, he ought to be writing Buck Rogers fiction. After checking aeronautical maps, the interviewer concluded Arnold's estimates of distance, speed, course, and size could very possibly be factual, but by then the publicity had already begun to hurt. Arnold said crowds were waiting for him at business stops, and the ridicule had grown so exhausting that if he ever saw anything similar again, he would be tempted to say nothing at all. On August 5, 1947, Palmer wrote again. By then, the newspapers had spread the story widely, and Fred Crisman had already wired Palmer for instructions. Palmer told Crisman to keep quiet with the press for the time being. He also tried to steady Arnold, insisting there was no need to panic and no proof of some giant hidden plot. Even if recent deaths and rumors seemed suspicious, Palmer said he saw no direct connection between them and the discs. What mattered, in Palmer's eyes, was that Arnold finish his report, send in his affidavit, and help preserve the facts. Palmer pressed harder in that second letter. He told Arnold that the matter must not be hushed up or forgotten, that the discs were real, and not just something imagined or laughed away. He praised Arnold's investigation, asked again about photographs of the so-called ducks, and promised that if Arnold stayed in contact, he would eventually be told the whole story Palmer believed he was uncovering. To Palmer, Arnold's sighting was not an isolated oddity. It was the first real break in a mystery he believed had been building for decades. And that is where the Kenneth Arnold and Raymond A. Palmer story truly locks into place. One man insisting on facts from the cockpit, and another insisting the facts meant more than the world yet understood. Between the clear sky over the Cascades, the letters on Venture Press stationery, the military memo, the public ridicule, and the growing pressure to explain the unexplainable, the modern flying saucer mystery took on a life of its own. Kenneth Arnold never claimed to know what he saw. He only claimed that he saw it clearly, measured it carefully, and told the truth as best he could. Raymond A. Palmer saw something else in the story, not just a headline, but the opening chapter of a much larger mystery. Between Arnold's sober testimony and Palmer's relentless pursuit, a single June sighting became the spark that changed American folklore forever. And even now, the same question still hangs over Mount Rainier. What crossed that sky in 1947?